Never judge a man by the cuffs on his jacket, because the person you are pushing around might just hold the clearance to end your entire career with a single phone call. Marcus Vance stood on the sun-baked concrete outside Metro National Bank, holding a secure encrypted briefcase close to his chest. He wore a simple grey hoodie and worn jeans, blending into the morning rush hour. To the untrained eye, he looked like anyone else passing through the city. But looks can be dangerously deceiving. Officer Dave Miller slammed his cruiser brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt as he veered right onto the sidewalk. Miller stepped out, a smug, power-tripping grin plastered across his face. He had been looking for an easy target all morning, and Marcus fit every biased stereotype locked inside his narrow mind. "All right, freeze right there, pal," Miller barked, resting his hand aggressively on his holster as he marched forward. "Drop the case and put your hands behind your back. You look like you're casing this bank." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't run. He calmly turned around, his eyes locking onto the cop with an icy, unreadable composure that immediately threw Miller off guard. "You have no grounds for detention, officer," Marcus said, his voice deep, smooth, and entirely devoid of fear. "I am conducting official business. I suggest you step back." Miller laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that drew the attention of passing pedestrians. He stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space and shoving a heavy hand against his shoulder, forcing him against the cold brick wall of the bank. "Don't lecture me about the law, boy," Miller sneered, pulling out his handcuffs with a metallic click. "In this city, I am the law. And you're about to find out what happens when you don't belong in a neighborhood like this." As the cold steel cuffs snapped tightly around Marcus's wrists, the heavy glass doors of the bank suddenly swung wide open behind them, revealing a towering federal entourage stepping out into the sunlight. The heavy double-glass doors of the bank slammed against the exterior walls with a loud thud, instantly shattering the smug atmosphere Miller had just built around himself. Out stepped a formidable line of armed federal marshals, moving with synchronized, terrifying precision. But it was the man walking at the dead center of the formation that made the blood run cold in Miller's veins. Director Harrison Vance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation walked with absolute authority, his tailored trench coat billowing slightly in the morning wind. Miller froze, the handcuffs still half locked in his grip. His arrogant grin evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sickening knot of panic in his stomach. He wasn't dealing with an ordinary civilian. He had just cuffed an active federal asset in broad daylight. "Officer, what in God's name do you think you are doing?" Director Vance's voice cut through the morning air like a razor, carrying a lethal combination of freezing cold fury and absolute power. Miller's hands began to shake uncontrollably. He dropped his grip on the handcuffs, stumbling backward a half step as he desperately tried to find his voice. Director Vance, sir," Miller stammered, his face turning an ashen shade of pale as sweat instantly beaded on his forehead. I saw him acting suspicious outside the financial district. Protocol dictates." Director Vance didn't even bother to let the trembling cop finish his pathetic excuse. He bypassed Miller entirely, walking past the patrol cruiser with long, heavy strides until he stood directly in front of Marcus, who was still standing calmly against the brick wall with his hands cuffed behind his back. The entire sidewalk fell completely dead silent. Passers-by stopped in their tracks. Even the other backup officers standing near Miller's cruiser lowered their heads, realizing the catastrophic mistake their partner had just made. Director Vance reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a heavy brass key, and stepped closer to his handcuffed operative. The metallic click of the brass key turning in the lock was deafening, against the absolute silence of the street. Director Vance pushed the shackle open, freeing Marcus's wrists with a sharp, crisp snap. Marcus rubbed his left wrist gently, his expression remaining completely unreadable as he stared down the trembling police officer who had just assaulted him. Director Vance didn't look at Miller yet. Instead, he reached out, straightening the lapel of Marcus's grey hoodie with a gesture that reeked of deep, unshakable respect. "Are you all right, Agent Vance?" Director Vance asked, his voice low, controlled, and sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm fine, Director," Marcus replied smoothly, his tone calm and steady. "Just conducting a routine security sweep of the sector. Though it seems your local municipal department needs a refresher course on who actually holds federal jurisdiction." Miller's knees buckled slightly. The word agent echoed inside his skull like a gunshot. Agent, not a suspect, not a civilian, a federal operative. And judging by the last name and the heavy security detail, a high-ranking one reporting directly to the top. Miller opened his mouth, desperately trying to form words, but only a pathetic, choked gasp came out. He took another stumbling step back, his badge feeling like a heavy anchor dragging him down into professional ruin. "Sir, I didn't know," Miller finally blurted out, his voice cracking with sheer desperation as he looked between Marcus and the FBI director. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was standing outside a bank in a hoodie. How was I supposed to know he was federal? Director Vance finally turned his head slowly, locking his piercing, icy glare onto the disgraced cop. The look in the director's eyes promised absolute destruction. "That," Director Vance said coldly, stepping right up to Miller's face, "is precisely why a badge in the hands of a bigot is a dangerous weapon. You didn't see an American citizen. You didn't see an officer of the law. You saw skin color and a hoodie, and you assumed you were judge, jury, and executioner." Director Vance raised two fingers, signaling to the federal marshals standing at attention behind him. Two heavily armed agents stepped forward instantly, marching straight toward Miller with zip ties ready in their hands. "Wait! What are you doing?" Miller shrieked, panic entirely overriding his authority as the federal marshals grabbed his arms with iron grips, twisting him around against the hood of his own police cruiser. Detaining an individual for impersonating a law enforcement officer while committing unlawful detainment, assault, and civil rights violations under federal statute, Director Vance stated smoothly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Your local precinct commander has already been notified. Your badge, your gun, and your jurisdiction are revoked, effective immediately." The metal zip ties clicked tightly around Miller's wrists, biting painfully into his skin. The tables had turned in a matter of minutes. The man who had strutted out of his squad car believing he owned the streets was now pinned against his own hood, reaping the bitter harvest of his own unchecked prejudice. Passers-by on the sidewalk whispered and pointed, pulling out their phones to capture the downfall of a corrupt cop. Miller thrashed helplessly, his face pressing against the dusty metal of the cruiser hood. "You can't do this! I'm municipal police! You don't have the authority over city!" "Agent Vance!" Director Vance interrupted, ignoring the frantic screaming and turning his attention back to Marcus. "Is the encrypted briefcase secure?" Marcus lifted the heavy metallic case slightly, his expression remaining as cool as ice. "Compromised? Never, Director. The operational data was transferred off-site the moment this officer decided to interrupt my surveillance." Miller's heart completely stopped. Surveillance? The bank wasn't being cased. It was a federal sting operation targeting corrupt financial networks, and he had literally handcuffed the lead operative standing right in the middle of it. He hadn't just harassed an innocent citizen, he had actively sabotaged a federal counterintelligence operation. Director Vance nodded slowly, gesturing for the marshals to haul the weeping, disgraced cop toward an unmarked black SUV parked at the curb. "Take him to the federal holding facility," Director Vance ordered. "Let's see how tough he feels when he's sitting on the other side of an interrogation table." As Miller was shoved unceremoniously into the back of the SUV, the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his frantic cries for mercy. But the worst part wasn't the arrest. It was the fact that Marcus was just getting started. The black SUV carrying the disgraced officer pulled away from the curb, its tires kicking up a light dust before disappearing down the bustling city street. The sirens were gone. The chaos had settled. Marcus stood undisturbed on the pavement, adjusting the strap of the secure metallic briefcase across his shoulder. He looked down at the spot where he had been unlawfully detained just moments prior, a subtle, knowing smile touching the corners of his mouth. Director Vance stepped closer, placing a firm, supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder. "That could have blown our entire cover," Director Vance said, his tone softening into one of genuine professional respect. You handled that with absolute precision, Agent Vance. Your composure under fire is why you lead this division. Arrogance is predictable, Director, Marcus replied smoothly, his eyes scanning the financial district's towering glass skyscrapers. People who look down on others are always blind to what's right in front of them. He thought he was protecting the bank. Instead, he walked right into a trap he never even saw coming. And the primary target inside? Director Vance asked, leaning in slightly. Marcus tapped the biometric scanner on the side of the encrypted briefcase. All financial logs, offshore shell company transfers, and internal memos have been successfully downloaded. The network is compromised. By morning, the entire corruption ring will be dismantled from the top down. Director Vance nodded slowly, a grim smile forming on his lips. Good. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks power gives them the right to trample others. Justice doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes, it wears a hoodie and waits quietly for the right moment to strike. With a final crisp nod, Marcus turned and walked down the steps, blending back into the bustling crowd of the city. He looked like an ordinary civilian once again, but the message was absolute. True authority doesn't need to shout to be heard, and karma always collects its debts.